Now's the time to finally realize we the people must make some choices. If we want single-payer health care, now's the time to raise our voices.
Well, welcome everybody to another PNHP Washington monthly meeting where we discuss very important subjects. Today we have a guest from the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project to discuss what's going on with immigrants these days, a very propitious subject. So I'll start with the land acknowledgement, in which we acknowledge the original inhabitants of this area and how we've totally messed up their environment. So we acknowledge that Washington State contains the traditional territory of the many Native American peoples. Their presence pervades the lands and waters surrounding us. May we nurture that relationship with our Native neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. Okay, so I guess you're next, David, right?
Yeah, I'll just give a little update on some announcements of events happening around here and so on. Pramila has a resistance lab. Do people know about that?
Somebody went to one of those training thing, and it was apparently really, really good.
I think that's something everybody should consider signing up for, because she's carrying a really heavy load, she and Bernie and AOC, to get the grassroots people to cooperate with each other. And this is what we need, because it seems like the Democratic Party leaders are not stepping up at the way we think a lot of people think they need to do if we're going to fight this horrendous stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. and Congress. The Washington State Legislature is going to be closing, I think, about the end of the month, and there's a few things that are still possible to pass there. Many of them that we were concerned about didn't make the cutoff. The best way to keep up with that, I found, is that the PSARA's website, Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action. It's PSARA, PSARA.org. And Pam Crone is their one who's leading that, who tells you every day or two about what's happening and what you can do to call your or message your legislatures and tell them to support the bills. The main two PSARA was interested in were the House Joint Memorial 8002, which is their level the playing field strategies, which is to make traditional Medicare have the same value for people as Medicare Advantage does, because Medicare Advantage has the advantage of having very cheap premiums, in some cases not any premiums. But if you start to use it, then you get all kinds of delays and denials of treatment and restricted places you can go to get your care and so on. So I think we're pretty familiar with that, because PNHP National has been working on that for months and months. House Joint Memorial 8002 asks our legislature to craft this message and send it to CMS in Washington, D.C., and also I think to the president or something. Then the other one is House Joint Memorial 8004, which is a single payer help in having single payer in our state. So individual states would be able to get federal money that comes in other places in our state and gather those up together and have our own single payer. And we're asking those same folks to help us with that. Another thing that happens is that the PNHP New York City Metro chapter has kind of monthly programs that are really, really valuable. And they've got one coming up on April 22nd, quote, "How We Win the Fight Against Medicaid Cuts." I'll put the link in there. It's worth watching. It lasts about an hour. They have some great speakers, and that's probably the most active PNHP chapter in the country. Hugh is our national board member.
The big thing they're working on right now is this moral injury survey. To that end, our president, Dr. Singh, testified in front of a congressional hearing a couple weeks ago about Medicare Advantage. The survey has finally gotten IRB permission. So, and they had some hurdles there where there was some confidentiality issues about respondents, etc. So that's all set. They would love you to go onto the PNHP.org national website and sign up as many people as you can to participate in that survey.
Ideally, these would be current practitioners who are dealing with Medicare Advantage and may suffer from being not able to give the care they think their patients need. So that gives them a moral injury as well as affects the care of their patients that they know they need. So last thing, I think I heard from that meeting that they've got over 1,000 people have completed the survey now, and they hope to get somewhere near 2,000. And then they're going to release the survey in the fourth quarter of this year. And they've had another couple of investigations like that on the overcharges of Medicare Advantage. And what was the other one? Anyway, that had wide significance and were quoted all over the place. So I'm hoping this moral injury is going to do the same thing. And fighting Medicare privatization of our healthcare system is the main focus the board is concerned with right now.
A good portion of this last board meeting was actually presentations by various students in SNAP chapters around the country on different things that they had done to organize their communities, which were really very remarkable. And some of them came from, very rural, very conservative states. And one of the coolest things that they call it a Medicare bingo game that they played, and they started in one nursing home and it kind of spread like wildfire. And I can't remember was it in Virginia or one of the Appalachian states. And the student was really great in the presentation that they gave. So it's encouraging to see that our SNAP chapters around the country are really doing a lot of great work, because our future, of course, is young. We still have a hard time getting residents interested. We've got some residents who are now on our national board, but I think once the students hit their clinical years and their clerkships, they are so busy, and then they're a moving target because in many places they're geographically dispersed, particularly our medical school. That said, that's why a lot of our board members who are students now aren't here, because they're now in clerkships and extremely busy. So we have to keep supporting them. We need to reach out to residents. I don't know if any of us are still working with residents, but even the faculty that are dues-paying members of our state chapter, this is a hard thing for them to do. They're probably still finishing their clinic charts on Epic now, which it takes a big chunk out of their time.
Yeah, we have 3 medical students on our PNHP Washington board, but as you said, it's hard for them to attend meetings because they're working all day in different places around the state, and they've got families to attend to and so on.
Okay, I just found this very timely article. It's called "Deporting Immigrants May Further Shrink the Healthcare Workforce." Like, duh.
I think you all remember the rage that was generated at the health insurance industry, brought about by the action of Luigi Mangione against the CEO of United Healthcare, who was trying to attend a meeting of his investors to buy back stock or do some financial scheme like that. Anyway, National Single Payer, a national organization supporting National Single Payer, hence their name, thought it best to seize on this opportunity to put back on the nation's agenda single payer healthcare, Medicare for all, by organizing a national day of action in various cities across the nation on May 31st. So May 31st is the date that the action will take place. Single payer Medicare for all seems to have gone by the wayside in the discussion in Congress and in the political parties. So this would be an important action to hopefully bring it back into the conversation. So the PNHP Washington Board has agreed to co-sponsor an action in Seattle, which will most likely be a rally at a decent venue like Westlake Park, or if we're optimistic that we're going to get a big turnout, maybe we could cordon off Seattle Center or something and have some rally there. Currently, besides Seattle, actions are planned in Portland, Oregon, Louisville, Houston, the Bay Area, Charlotte, Los Angeles, Houston, and more to come. So we're just starting to gather up our forces and supporting organizations in the Seattle area to get on board and contribute to this effort. I've made presentations to Backbone Campaign, Puget Sound Alliance for Retired Americans, and Workers Strike Back, who have all agreed to co-sponsor this action. And of course, there's many more organizations that we need to approach and ask if they will at least notify their members of this action. So there's a flyer available from National Single Payer, the group that's organizing the action, for the events on May 31st, plus a toolkit with suggestions for organizing the action that I would urge you all to check out. You just need to Google National Single Payer, and it'll come right up. It'll say National Day of Action on May 31st, and there's a flyer there, and there's also a toolkit that you can look at that will hopefully guide our efforts. So this is just getting started, and hopefully we'll get something going for a major event.
We've got Malou Chávez, who's going to be talking to us about what's on almost every page of every newspaper. There's something about immigrants, and there's nothing really that's helpful that our government and is doing help for them. So it's up to individual organizations like Malou's and others, and us, to do what we can to support the immigrants who are under such a battle these days to do what they need to do to support their families and their lives. So I first met Malou at Pramila Jayapal's town hall. It was about a month, 2 months ago, when she was up on the stage as one of the panelists after Pramila gave her opening remarks. So she was gracious enough to agree to give us a presentation on what we need to know about what's happening to immigrants, what we can do to help with what resources we have. She's the executive director of the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project, NWIRP, basically dedicated to advancing and defending the rights of immigrants. She earned her BA in political science from the University of California in Los Angeles, and received her JD degree from Seattle University School of Law. So I'm prepared to learn a whole lot, and particularly about the struggles of immigrants and what I and the rest of us can do to help. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to appreciate all of you for your thoughtfulness and also invitation to join you in your meeting and share a little bit about Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, our work, and our client communities. as well as our staff and the impact that we are seeing our communities experience in this current administration. So I'm going to introduce Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and then get into a lot of information. So please feel free to interrupt and let me know if I can answer any questions or clarify anything that I say. Thank you. Some of you may be familiar with Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Our organization was established in 1984 as at the time it was called the Joint Legal Task Force for Central American Refugees. And it came about as a response to community members in the Seattle area who were experiencing high numbers of deportation. Many of them were asylum seekers at the time. It was formally incorporated in 1987, and in 1992, as a result of a merger of various organizations, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project came to be. Full circle, we are still representing many community members from Central America seeking asylum and facing high numbers of deportation 41 years later. Except our client community has now become a representative of 145 countries in 2024. We served clients who speak over 63 different languages. So beyond Central American community members, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project serves immigrant community members from various different countries, 145 of them in 2024. We are the largest free legal services immigration legal organization in Washington State. All of our services are free, but also one of the largest organizations in the Western United States. Sometimes we are the largest, and then we become one of the largest in the Western United States. Although our bread and butter is around legal services, direct legal services, working with individuals, families, people in detention, our work also entails systems change, systemic advocacy around impact litigation to advance and defend the rights of immigrants, and legislative advocacy here in Washington State and before Congress for change in policies and laws. We also engage in community education. Like today, I am sharing information and hoping that as we share information, correct information helps demystify some of the information we learn, but also introduces who our client communities are and the work that we do. We are a statewide organization. We have 4 offices in the state: Granger, Seattle, Tacoma, and Wenatchee, but we serve community members across the state. In 2024, we served over 20,000 people, more than 12,000 of them, 12,697 to be exact, of the people we served were served through direct legal representation, so they became our clients. Our mission statement is to promote justice by defending and advancing the rights of immigrants, and we do it through 3 different pillars: legal services, systemic advocacy, and community education. The goal of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project is to not exist at some point, but we know that that's not going to be the case anytime soon. But in the meantime, we strive for justice and equity for all persons, regardless where they were born. In 2013, we came together as a team and discussed what our values are, both in how we support the client communities that we work with, but also in our how we work with each other and in partnership with other organizations. So dignity, fairness, solidarity, self-determination, safety, and inclusion became our values, and we have held strong to those values, and they ground us in how we do our work. And I invite you to learn a little bit more by visiting our website. I'm also happy to share this PowerPoint presentation for those of you who are interested. This is our staff in 2024. In October 2024, we had our all-staff retreat. We were about 170 staff here. Currently, as of April 11, NERP has 87 staff members. 96 of them are attorneys. 58 are legal advocates. They have their own caseloads under the supervision of attorneys. 28 of our staff are in the operations team, so HR, finance, development, communications, operations, and IT. And then we have 5 social services staff. We are a unionized organization. We're a union shop. And out of the 187 staff, 150 are union members. I mentioned that our community in 2024, client community in 2024, spoke more than 63 languages. Our staff speak more than 27 languages collectively. So while we're not at the 63, 65 languages yet, we are trying to do our best to be representative of the communities that we serve. For comparison, our staff in 2006, we were just 31. I started at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project in 2010 as a staff attorney, and we were about 42. Fast forward, we are 187 now. You can see the numbers here at the bottom where our growth has been steady, but as you may all know, the need for services is so great that it feels like we can't even make a dent. There's so much need. We can grow as big as we can with the supportive community, but it feels that with all the changes, with all the attacks, especially during this administration, we seem to be just making slow progress. But we also know that by walking alongside, helping one by one community member, family members, community, we are making a difference in the work that we do.
We lost your sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank
Hear
you.
you
now. And so while we have a need, we also know that in order to continue serving the community, we need to diversify our revenue. And so over 60% of our funding, however, is government funding. And this includes state, local, and federal funding. 21% of NERP's funding is federal funding. We have 11 grants and contracts. Recently, we lost 2 contracts. One that helps us provide services to unaccompanied children and youth who are the clients under that program are over 500 children and youth who need support. You know, can you imagine going before an immigration judge who is a most of the time, former government attorney, and going against a very experienced government attorney as a youth, as a child, and be able to represent yourself? That is very difficult. It's difficult for adults. It's difficult for people who understand the language, let alone for a youth or child. Our youngest client in the Unaccompanied Children program, which is one of the funding cuts that we received, is as young as 1 year old. So we know that children and youth aren't able to represent themselves in immigration court. Most of the children and youth who are represented through this Unaccompanied Children program are in deportation proceedings. So the Unaccompanied Children's program is 10% of our federal funding. The rest of it includes funding for survivors of violence, funding for people who are in detention. And in fact, last week we received a termination of our contract to support people in detention. One of the goals of this current administration is to increase immigration enforcement and as much detention as possible. And so the loss of these two funding is very serious for us, and it has a negative impact. However, because our funding is diversified and because we live in a state and community where we are supported, many of our supporters have come up and continued to contribute to ensure that we're able to support clients who, without federal funding, we would otherwise not be able to support. And so while we've received cuts, we continue to meet our ethical obligations and our moral obligations to support community members. But we can only do it for so long, right? It's short term. If we don't get the contracts renewed, 2026 might look different for Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and it will certainly look different for our client communities. Our work is for people who are low income or no income community members, or who have low income or no income in Washington State. And most of our work is to support community members become documented. And so we do this through family petitions. The most common way to become a green card holder or lawful permanent resident is through a family petition. In fact, over 60% of green cards are through a family member. We also help people obtain asylum status or asylee status. We also support community members in humanitarian protections, like survivors of violence, victims of crimes, survivors of trafficking, and special immigrant juvenile status classification. A lot of our work has become deportation defense, which encompasses a lot of this work that I highlight here. It's all categories. So someone can be in deportation proceedings, not detained, and seek a family petition or U visa or asylum status. Another person can be detained and in deportation proceedings, and again, seek any of these different types of protections. A lot of our clients are already documented, and they are green card holders, lawful permanent residents, who are seeking to naturalize and become citizens. Right now, with the current administration, we are seeing that not only undocumented community members are facing attacks and risks of apprehension, detention, but also documented community members. So we've seen college students with visas, with lawful status. We've seen people with lawful permanent resident being detained and arrested. And so it used to be that our goal was to get as many people documented because we knew that would create protection. Now it seems that our client communities are expanding to include even documented immigrants. And so there's a lot of internal and external changes happening where we are trying to meet the need as this current administration is changing policies, practices, and the law for our communities. We also support client communities in temporary status protections like deferred action. You may know people who entered as children under the age of 16. And in 2012, there was a program called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Many of our community members were protected, given protection from deportation and work authorization. Since 2017, DACA has been challenged by the federal administration. There was a pause, and now in January 2025, there was a Fifth Circuit decision that allowed DACA to continue, but now it's going to another decision is going to come out, and we will see whether DACA survives. Temporary protected status, you may know that some countries are designated as countries who citizens could receive protected status from deportation, like Afghanistan, like Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Syria, countries who are facing turmoil, civil wars, national disasters, and it would be impossible for them to return. But now, with this current administration, we are seeing termination of temporary status. Some of these community members have been on temporary status for decades, have established community here, have family members, and are now being impacted. All of this work that we do directly through individuals or families inform our what we call impact litigation work. We are able to identify trends and able to start seeing what impact our client communities have through this work because we do the direct services. And so we have an impact litigation unit that takes challenges in federal court in order to advance and defend the rights of immigrants as a result of the work that we do on the day-to-day basis. We also have a community outreach unit and a social services unit. In 2019, we established the social services unit because we know that when clients walk through our doors, it's their immigration status that they're hoping to secure or adjust, but that's not the only issue that they're facing. They may be facing housing insecurity, food insecurity, other types of social services needs. And so our social services unit focuses on connecting our clients to those resources so that the legal team can focus on the legal work. And this has been since 2019. Nobody knew that the pandemic would happen. So it was very helpful to have this unit who can then connect our clients to needs at the time in 2020. And I mentioned our impact litigation work. Just for some examples, we have a few cases that were filed the last round of this presidential administration, but we also have some cases that were filed in 2025. Yesterday, I checked with our litigation unit, our team, and I asked, there should be about 4 cases that we filed since 2025 started. And they responded, no, in fact, there are about 10 cases. And can you imagine how many cases have been filed since 2025? And this includes individual cases like habeas or class action nationwide. So our work as an organization goes beyond Washington State. Through the impact litigation work, we're able to make change in immigration policy, practice, and law across the country. And that we cannot measure. It's very immeasurable. Hundreds of thousands of people benefit when there are positive changes. In 2025, just to give you a few examples, before January 2025, we filed a lawsuit against Adams County, Washington, because they were in violation of Keep Washington Working Act. This is a Washington state constitutional act, right? Constitutional law that says local law enforcement they are prohibited from collaborating with federal immigration authorities for civil immigration enforcement. If it's related to a criminal proceedings, there's no prohibition there. There's no Keep Washington Working does not become it does not impact whether law enforcement can collaborate as it relates to criminal proceedings. For example, human trafficking investigation. That's not where Keep Washington Working Act comes in. Where it comes in is around civil immigration enforcement. And Adams County has said, the sheriff has said, they will continue to hold people for civil immigration detention, and therefore they are failing to abide by this Washington law. And so we filed a lawsuit not only to defend the rights of the person who was held for civil immigration enforcement, but also to help deter future collaboration with ICE or immigration enforcement, not just by Adams County, but by other sheriffs or otherwise law enforcement agencies. The Attorney General's office also has sued Adams County in a separate case. Early in 2025, you know that the first day of the current administration, there was a presidential executive order ending the birthright to citizenship. So the Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit, but NERP filed a separate lawsuit on behalf of impacted community members. So 3 of our clients who were expecting or are expecting after the due date that the president set to trigger people not acquiring part of a case because it was joined, the Attorney General's office case and NERP's case were merged or joined together, and we are now co-litigators with the Attorney General's office, but NERP represents the impacted community members. Also, as an example, early this year, we filed a lawsuit, and this is a class action, meaning many people are impacted, and it's a nationwide lawsuit challenging the Department of Homeland Security's policy of deporting people to other countries that they are not citizens of, and these are called third countries. So when someone is in deportation proceedings, the government has to designate a country, and typically it's the country where the person is born or they are a citizen of. What's happening is now the federal administration is saying, oh, we can deport anyone to El Salvador, for example. And we know you've seen news reports what that prison looks like. There's no due process. Even when the U.S. Supreme Court has said you have to return the person that you wrongfully deported, they're not able to return the person. And so the rule of law, due process, all of that seems to be a different world. There does not seem to be process or order right now as it relates to immigration. Our case is challenging deporting people to third countries without allowing them to apply for fear-based protection, so withholding of removal, to not be removed to that third country because they could be fearing persecution otherwise. And so that's just 3 examples of the about 10 cases that we filed just this year in the last 3 months. And I want to say that this is not the first round, as you know, of the current federal administration. The last round in 2017, we received, we started identifying through our work that there was something happening with people from Muslim countries as they were pursuing their naturalization application to become citizens. We started noticing that certain clients were taking longer than others. And there was nothing wrong, like no conviction or arrest history. There was not necessarily anything wrong other than that they were from a Muslim majority country. And so we started identifying this, and we filed a nationwide class action in 2017 6 years later, in 2025, is that 6 years? I can't even count. Now we received a settlement, in fact, a summary judgment saying that the policy that the Department of Homeland Security had been following, which was a secret government vetting process, was wrong. And so now our clients who are from Muslim majority countries seeking to become citizens can no longer be subjected to this secret vetting process. And similar to a client from a non-Muslim majority country, they should be following the same process. The last round of this administration, we also received a cease and desist order for NERP to stop our limited representations or our limited services offered to people mostly in detention proceedings. And it said that we should not be providing what we call limited services, meaning we're not entering our appearance as attorneys to be on the case for the duration of the case, but we were helping people complete forms, file a motion to change venue from Los Angeles to Seattle, for example. And that limited or short-term representation is what we received that cease and desist letter for. We challenged it, and it ultimately resulted in not just in a settlement, a nationwide injunction protecting NERP as an organization, but all legal services providers across the country who are similarly situated, providing temporary or short-term services, to say that they can, in fact, that we can provide these limited services. And we also changed the practice and created a new form in deportation proceedings that in the past, it used to be an immigration attorney only had the option to say, I fully represent this person. Now there's an opportunity to say, I represent this person, but only as to this matter, only as to filing the asylum, only as to filing the bond request to be released from detention, only as to the deportation case, as opposed to saying I represent for the entirety of the case. And many people, this led to many people having access to legal representation, even if it's limited. So just this is a very short, brief introduction to the work that we do through our impact litigation. And I know I talk about our client communities, and I want to say that a lot of our client communities are both seeking immigration status. Some of them have immigration status. And one thing to remember about immigration status is that it is fluid. Immigration status is fluid. Someone can be documented and then be at risk of losing their status. Someone you may have met at the time were undocumented, but may now be documented. And so that's something to take away. These are the different statuses that someone may have. U.S. citizens and then non-citizens, which is a alphabet soup of different statuses that someone can have. I did mention that this current administration calls for mass deportation and detention. Some of the things that we have seen related to increase in interior enforcement is that Tacoma, for example, is one of the largest immigration jails, the Tacoma Detention Center, with a capacity of 1,575. In January, we were seeing about 700 to 800 people detained. Recently, we are seeing about 1,500 people detained. So it has doubled since this current administration has taken office. We know that people are being asked to register, to make the decision to add their names to a list that might lead to deportation, or if they fail to register, it might lead to criminal prosecution and civil fines. And so financial fines. And then we are seeing increase in detention, arrest, and in Bellingham, we saw a large-scale raid that we had not seen in years. We also know that the Department of Homeland Security is trying to get the Internal Revenue Services, the IRS, to share data about undocumented community members who have filed taxes, because that was what they were asked to do, right? And that's what they've been contributing. But now, because they've filed taxes and done the right thing to quote unquote, now they are facing potential deportation. We also know that Social Security Administration has now been asked to qualify people as deaf or dead and added to the death list when in fact they are not. And this is to prevent people from receiving benefits. There's a lot happening. These are just some examples of what's happening with the current administration. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have. But I want to just briefly share, when we talk about deportation proceedings, removal proceedings, there's a process that should be happening. What this administration is doing for many community members is removing, not even allowing the deportation process to continue. And so typically in a deportation proceeding, or there are two questions that are asked. Is the person subject to deportation? If so, do they have a defense to deportation? Can they stay, right? And how do people end up in removal? They're either detained at the border when entering, they're either identified by ICE or Border Patrol, or they're arrested by local law enforcement for another reason. Again, in Keep Washington Working Act is only around civil immigration enforcement collaboration. So if it's related to criminal investigation, that's different, right? But these are the typical ways that someone ends up in deportation proceedings. The current administration has now expanded its authority for something that's called expedited removal. And I have it here, expedited removal, meaning that someone doesn't have an opportunity to see a judge, and they expanded their authority for people who are in the US for less than 2 years, anywhere in the country. If they cannot meet the threshold that they've been in the US continuously for more than 2 years, they are subject to expedited removal. They don't get a chance to have a deportation process, see an immigration judge. The most common way for someone to be in deportation proceedings is what's called the 240 proceedings. And this is where you get to see a judge, you get to defend your status, you get to present arguments for why you should remain in the US. You have a family member, you've been in the US for 10 years, you have asylum and fear to return, right? There's a process. Expedited removal, no process, you just are removed. And a lot of the people who are being sent to third countries like El Salvador are experiencing no process. Someone who has gone through deportation proceedings and have seen a judge in the past and maybe they did an appeal or the appeal was dismissed have what's called final deportation orders. The only way that they can see a judge is if they express fear to return to the country of deportation. And if so, then they are allowed to do a withholding only proceedings. They cannot apply for family petition. They cannot apply for other relief. It would have to be specific to withholding, which is a type of asylum protection, without the possibility of ever becoming a green card holder or travel outside the US. It's just protection from deportation. And while someone is in deportation proceedings, they see the judge or not see the judge, there's something called bond proceedings where if they are detained, then they must have an opportunity to prove that they are not a flight risk, that they have ties to the US, that they may have a relief option for immigration protection. And if they're able to meet that, then they're supposed to be released. But what's happening is this current administration has now said, no, certain people are now subject to mandatory detention. And that's what we're dealing with. That's a very latest change in law that changed the immigration and naturalization statute. And immigration attorneys and legal representatives are constantly keeping up to date with all these changes in policies, practice, and now law. But we're also keeping track of what's happening in our community. Just so that you are aware, in Washington State, there are two immigration courts. There's the Seattle Immigration Court, which is the non-detained docket. So if you live in Spokane or in Alaska or even Oregon, you will be sent to the Tacoma Detention Center if you are being detained. But if you're in Washington State and you're not detained, you're going to be sent to Seattle. It doesn't matter where you live in Washington State. So you could be traveling 3-5 hours to go to your immigration court hearing. It's very important to know that in the immigration context, there's no right to an appointed attorney in immigration proceedings. So unless the person can afford a private attorney or they have access to a free attorney, like at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, they're likely going to represent themselves. And so very quickly, who is at risk of being arrested by ICE? The law permits the government to deport certain immigrants, including people who are undocumented and people with legal status like a green card who have certain criminal convictions or offenses. The current administration's priorities seem to be people with final orders of removal. We talked about people having gone through the process, being ordered deported, maybe their appeal case got dismissed. These are going to be people in priority for deportation or detention. People with who are immigrants and have criminal histories. At some point, all non-citizens are at some risk if they are people without status. And another priority seems to be people subject to expedited removal enforcement. This includes people who were allowed in through parole. You may have heard in the news that community members, even immigration attorneys, are receiving notices of termination of parole. This is permission to be in the US. And now the government, starting April 3rd, started sending notices to people who were given parole, permission to be in the US, saying that that now had been terminated. There's some lawsuits, challenges in federal court. Some of them have been paused, but others are ending their deportation, their permission to stay, and are being asked to self-deport. And these are very concerning notices. The government says, if you do not self-deport within 7 days of receiving this notice, we will find you. And that just completely just disregards the process, right? That people have the right to seek counsel and have a process. The other thing is that not everyone who is an immigrant is vulnerable to deportation, but we know that they're at risk, right? If they are undocumented in particular. Most people have the right to have their cases heard before an immigration judge. There are some exceptions, as I mentioned. There are some types of protection, including temporary protections that protect against deportation. All lawful permanent residents, people with resident status or green cards, cannot be detained or deported without a specific reason, and typically it's related to a criminal conviction, and they must face an immigration judge unless they sign a form. We have heard of community members who are being asked to sign a form when they travel outside the U.S. and come back to say that they give up their lawful permanent residence, that they give up their green card without knowing what they're signing. And that is not process. And so we are having to constantly advise and share information that all green card holders, lawful permanent resident status, have the right to be before an immigration judge, before their green card or lawful permanent resident status is taken away. So what can someone do if they are at risk of deportation? We've done Know Your Rights presentations, the right to remain silent, to speak with the lawyer, to not incriminate themselves, to not allow immigration officials enter private or restricted areas without judicial warrant, to make a plan with family or people that they trust, especially if there's a family unit where children might be left in the event of detention and deportation. To avoid contact with immigration officials, so not file applications unless they are consulting with an immigration lawyer. To avoid contact with the criminal legal system, because the law has now changed for specific crimes like shoplifting and theft, which are very minimal offenses, or there's a term for it that I'm forgetting, where shoplifting and theft is not a serious offense, but people are
misdemeanor.
Yes, thank you. Are subject to now mandatory detention because of change in law, right? Without the possibility of posting bond and being released. For shoplifting, a charge where they have not yet been found guilty. And we know that our idea of the criminal legal system is innocent until proven guilty. That unfortunately is not applying according to this federal administration, according to new law for people who are arrested for specific crimes, including shoplifting and theft. So there's criminalization of immigrant community members to a degree that we had not seen before. 1996 was around that time. This is a new time. And we are asking people to carry with them proof that they've been in the US for more than 2 years, because we know that with the expansion of the federal administration's authority for expedited removal to not have someone go before a judge, anyone can be at risk. So what is the impact that we are seeing on communities? The hostile immigration enforcement environment is one. There's so many attacks, changes in policies and processes and laws. There's uncertainty and higher levels of fear, possibility of mandatory detention and family separation. I mentioned the criminalization. We are hearing from children that there's bullying, racism, and discrimination happening. And not just in Washington State, but I'm focusing on the entire U.S., right? I think that we live in a state where there, in some ways, there are different experiences, but I think that it also applies here in Washington State, but broadly across the country. We know that there are negative effects on health and well-being, including anxiety and depression, mental health. We know that children's fears manifest in many ways, like behavioral changes, psychosomatic symptoms, mental health issues, fear of abandonment, and in some situations where there is a detained parent or deported parent, some children are having, and youth are having to become primary caregivers if they're at the age of lawful work employment access. Some of them are having to start working at age 16, 17 as a result of family separation. We know that there are going to be lifelong consequences for everything that's happening right now. Some people who have been survivors of violence, who are trauma survivors, are being re-triggered, is what we're facing or seeing in our clients. There's increase in risk of housing and food insecurity, reduced incomes, We've heard of housing authorities being asked to provide information about people that they're renting and the method of payment and the status of people. And it's just not a lawful warrant or subpoena because it was an administrative subpoena, but that is something that if someone were to submit that, then that places the person at risk, right? And there are also barriers to enrolling in programs, including limited or denied access to services incorrectly. One thing around benefits is, especially federal benefits, not everyone is eligible. Immigrants, for example, are not eligible for federal benefits from a 1996-97 law. But you have to be a green card holder for at least 5 years before you can even apply to receive a federal benefit in many instances. There's also unprecedented cuts in federal funding for programs which community members rely on. One of them is the programs that NERP provides for legal assistance, right? We're getting cuts there, and others. So that's just a few random, not random, but a list of some impact that we are seeing. These are some articles that I will share with you. I'll share the PowerPoint presentation. These are kind of old, but I think they're still very relevant. How fear and toxic stress are affecting daily life, well-being, and health as a result of living as an immigrant or in the U.S. The effect of hostile immigration policies on children's mental health, effects of deportation and forced separation, and even like a celebrity, a TV star who, even after finding success, is still grappling with the deportation of her parents. So these are just introductions to some of the experiences that our client communities are facing. And just quickly, joining the immigrant rights and justice movement could be around taking action, becoming a translator or interpreter, taking a pro bono immigration case, or a psychological evaluation. Many of our clients need some sort of mental health evaluation to support their case. Support immigrant justice organizations, learn about the detention system in the U.S. I mentioned that Tacoma has capacity of 1,575 people being held. It is one of the largest immigration jails in the country. We also learned that this administration, through FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, are planning to expand detention. And we don't know where those are going to be, but our community members might start being sent to detention centers outside of Washington. Learn about the racist history of immigration law in the U.S. and educate oneself about the rights and the rights of others. And the other thing is financial contributions is always helpful, but I think at the end of the day, it's always about showing up and sharing correct information that really helps support our communities. Thank you so much. This is a lot of information. I want to be available for questions, and you know, it goes beyond today. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments.
Really complicated. I'm glad you guys understand so many of the nuances.
That was an excellent presentation. I can just imagine, I mean, I think most of the world is very upset. The human tragedy is incredible, but also the economic impact of these aggressive deportation tactics and what it's going to do to our local, state, and national economy. I mean, so much work is done by immigrants. As we were just talking before, I mean, 25% of the physicians in this country weren't born in the U.S.
There.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I wanted to say thank you very much. I understand and appreciate it, and I hadn't seen it laid out quite so thoroughly. I knew parts of this. When we are instructing undocumented folks and other folks, we pass out these red cards with PNHP immigrant justice. And one of the things is no firme nada, that you have a right to derecho a hablar para abogado. Do they really have a right to speak to an attorney now, or is that eliminated when they get to Tacoma? Because we see people shipped over there.
So the right to speak to an attorney, I know it's a constitutional right that I think we have to remember to exercise regardless of our immigration status. But one difference is that there is no right to an appointed counsel, right? And that's the, if I understood your question, Craig. But one thing is, in Tacoma, even though we can have access to people who are detained through group orientations or individualized assessments, because of the need, 1,500 people, and NERP is one of the only group of attorneys who go to Tacoma. It's very difficult for someone to be able to hire an attorney either free of charge and if they're not earning income, private attorneys become even more limited. But the right to for an attorney or speak to an attorney remains important, because that helps protect both document potential violations that could lead to what we call dismissal of cases in the immigration context, but also it helps to hopefully have ICE or other immigration enforcement agencies to comply. But I don't know if I got your question correctly, sorry.
We should continue to instruct them to request to speak to an attorney.
Yes. Yes.
Which we do in Spanish. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I had read somewhere that if approached, once you answer any question, then you abrogated your right to not have to answer any further questions. Correct? Or
I think it's different than Miranda rights, for example. Miranda rights in the criminal context versus I have the right to speak to an attorney. I will not speak to you. I will not answer any questions. If they ask, do you live in Seattle? And you say yes, it doesn't mean that you have to answer, are you a U.S. citizen, right? So you still can invoke your right at any moment, and in fact, in any language. So you can say it in Spanish, you can say it in other language. I have the right to speak. I'm invoking my right to remain silent, even after you answer yes or no to what other question. Definitely around immigration status or criminal history, important that people are not answering questions, because the government's burden, it is the government's burden to prove that a person is not a U.S. citizen. And so if you're answering, were you born in the U.S. and you say no, that's it. That's probable cause that there is an immigration violation, right? Even though they might be wrong, because they might be a green card holder or some other, but I think it leads to that detention.
But you can say, like, I guess I read somewhere that once you open the door and you answer any question whatsoever, then you no longer have the right to remain silent.
Maybe it's around the consent. So when someone shows up either to a work site or your home, it's either they have a judicial warrant or they have consent to enter. So if you open the door and you say you can come in, that's it. Even if they don't have a judicial warrant. And I think that might be maybe where you're thinking,
Okay.
because they can ask, and even when they come in, you can say, I don't give you permission to enter. I am not going to answer any questions. You can still invoke it.
So even if you've given them permission to enter, you do not have to answer any questions.
That's right. And sometimes they enter without you even giving permission, right? Like you open the door to say, who are you? Can I get your card? I want to talk to my attorney. And they just come in. So there's a lot of violations that happen. Documenting it is important, and also remembering our rights.
Okay, Marguerite.
Yes, hi, I'm Marguerite, and I have a question about the death, labeling people as being dead. Is that, two questions? One, is that already happening? And if they do that, do you think that your organization or some other attorneys will challenge that? It sounds so illegal.
Yeah, we wouldn't unless it's impacting one of our clients, then we might. But I think that other organizations who focus on civil rights and maybe Social Security rights, benefits might be challenging. And in fact, I think there might be a current lawsuit, but I am not 100% sure. But yeah, it is not accurate either, right?
Right, they're lying. They're knowingly lying about you. Sounds. And so it has started. They have started doing that.
Yes, they have.
I have a question about funding from both the federal and the state levels. Immigrants, I don't think are Medicare is not available to them, and also the federal part of Medicaid, I don't think is available to them. But the state, we have Apple Health here, Medicaid for the state, and I think we're one of the states that immigrants can qualify very easily for that. Is that true? That's number one.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Second was our state legislature is now working on its budget for the next year or two, and Ferguson, our Governor Ferguson, is basically he's trying to cut money and avoid progressive revenue. But is there money from the state that has been given, other than Medicaid money, that has been given to refugees or refugee organizations, immigrant organizations? I think you said you had maybe some foundation, but is there any of that state money that?
Yes. In fact, when I talked about our community outreach unit, I mentioned something about the Washington Migrant and Asylum Seeker Support Project. So this is, for short, it's called WAMAS, and it is to have a centralized process for recently arrived community members who have entered the U.S. since January 2022 to be part of what's called a hub through the International Rescue Committee, IRC. And they go to IRC for an assessment of all of their needs, social services and legal needs. And if they have legal needs, then they go to NIRP. And NIRP, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, serves as the lead legal organization. And we do a legal assessment of their immigration case, and then we either keep the case in-house for services or we refer out. And that was appropriated last year. And this year, there's a proposed appropriation of 20 million or 25 million. And NIRP is one of the agencies or organizations that receives that funding. I think we get around, I'm not going to ask, but we don't get the full 20 million. It's very little compared to the full 20 million. We also receive what's called the legal aid for low-income immigrants. The House has proposed it at 18 million. The Senate has posted at 16 million. NERP gets 6 million of that in order to provide deportation defense. But we don't know what the current appropriation or the next biennium appropriation will look like. That's going to be important because of the federal loss of funding. The state funding helps us provide services to all the community members that we are now not able to support through the federal funding. And then there are other funding sources like naturalization, language access, and other things that other services organizations receive funding through the state.
So is this going to be a crisis? This funding, federal funding cut off, and I mean, Hugh said that somebody got fired already because of that. From where?
He was an immigration lawyer with the organization that takes care of minors, immigrant minors, and I forget the acronym for that.
Kind?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. So the unaccompanied children program is funding that goes for children and youth who came into the U.S. unaccompanied without a parent or guardian. And about 26,000 youth and children have benefited from it. Over 100 organizations received that funding, and NERP is one of them across the country. We have about 500 cases under that funding. The contract ended March 29th, March 30th. And as a result, one of our partners, which is KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, has closed their office in Seattle and 12 offices across the country. And they left 300 to 400 cases of clients without representation. And we are taking about at least 100 of those cases, because who else is going to be able to do that work? Children and youth are not going to be able to pay private attorneys. They can't, pursue their defense. But the rest of the children and youth through KIND who are left without attorneys, they're trying to figure out pro bono attorneys. They're trying to figure out other organizations. But the bulk of it, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project will take on. We're going to get some funding. Others are not going to get funding for the work that we're going to do. So, yeah, it's very impactful. Separately, another organization who is not necessarily serving youth and children has closed their legal department, and there are 68 people in need of representation, and NERP is going to take on over those cases for representation. And it really just Sarah, I see your hand, sorry. One quick comment is that, NERP has been around for 41 years. We have been very fortunate to have the support of community and partnerships, and we know that we can't do this alone. So the more organizations are out there doing this work, the better. But we're also in a position where we have that capacity and sustainability, and our board has been great at having reserves, having policies that have made Northwest Immigrant Rights Project a strong organization. And even with the loss of funding, we're saying we're going to keep going. We are not letting go of our clients. We have to keep both our ethical obligations, but all our moral obligations to the extent that we can. But we also recognize that this is short term. And in the long run, 2026, who knows what that's going to look like without ongoing funding. But for now, we continue keeping the cases that we have, keeping as many staff members that we can. We're not going to fire anyone or lay off as long as we can. But again, we don't know for how long.
Well, hopefully 2026 will bring about congressional action.
I hope so.
Sherry?
Yes. My question is kind of different. I find the climate of the political and public climate in the United States to be very unfriendly right now. And I'm wondering if we're having a decrease in people trying to immigrate to our country. Now, I recognize that NORP works with people who are already here and need legal representation. So this is, you might not know this, but I just wanted to ask whether you have seen any changes as a result of the United States becoming an unfriendly place to migrate to.
Yeah, thank you. So through our family services work, which are family petitions, we do help people immigrate from outside of the US. And so we help bring families together so that they're reunited or reunified. So in a way, we are seeing, and the other thing is family petition, but also victims of crime who may have left minor children behind in the home country, and now they get a U visa for victims of crimes, and we do the consular process to bring them over. Again, family reunification. So we are seeing that. We are experiencing challenges at the consular process level. We know that there's going to be a travel ban anytime soon, anytime now, like we don't know when, but about 40 countries are going to be denied entry. Many of those countries are going to be impacting our clients. We saw it in 2017 with the Muslim ban. And I worked personally with a client whose minor child could not come. And in fact, delays and delays and delays, and still are not able to find a visa appointment. In 2017, 6 years ago, we're still trying to find that reunification. So there are going to be people. The other thing that we're seeing is change in asylum laws. Asylum is an international right, any country, right? With the change in policies and current administration changing the way that people can enter the country, we've seen an impact in the number of people who can enter. If you don't have a visa to fly, and mostly people don't have visas because they're not from countries who have visa waiver programs, like mostly European countries or Chile and Latin America, right? You have to be from specific countries, or Japan. But if you're not a visa waiver country citizen, the only way you can come to the US is with a visa, with permission. And most visas for visiting purposes are given to people who have income, who have wealth in many countries. And so most of the clients that we serve are people with low income or no income, and their family members are not going to be able to get those visas. So the only way to come is to show up and ask for asylum or through a family petition. And you're showing up to ask for asylum, you're going to face a lot of hurdles. We're seeing asylum being redefined. Claims of people who are transgender clients are also impacted. For example, asylum officers were told that they cannot use the word transgender. And so we're having to walk around how we describe our client's identity to be able to seek that protection. And there's a lot happening around, just different identities that our clients have. And so, yes, entry is definitely impacted. And there's still deterrence, right? Because we see people with guns and the prisons in El Salvador and all these other things, which that is the intent, to create fear and deterrence.
And, you know, I have friends who are helping out at the Mexico-Arizona border, and there's hardly anybody coming now. Hardly, like handful of people a week. Used to be hundreds.
Yeah. They also closed some of the port of entries.
Yeah, so then they have to walk like, you know, a very long distance to get to request the flight.
Yeah.
Just to get the request. So this is what the Tucson Samaritans are helping out with, that, transporting people to the to where the Border Patrol is stationed 10 miles away or something from where they've been able to cross. But there's just very few people compared to what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not exactly sure why, Sherry. I mean, I think people are afraid. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was occasionally there have been vigilantes there trying to intimidate people, but the Samaritans just recently encountered, they just ignore them and move on. And they got, they had on their way back from the port, from the area where people were coming, they had a vehicle that was blocking an unmarked vehicle. And so they circumvented it and headed where they were going to the Border Patrol station and complained that there were these vigilantes that were blocking them. But they said, oh no, the guy makes a phone call and says, oh no, those are federal officers, unmarked vehicle. They didn't want to show any badges. When they were requested, they were just like flashed something you couldn't see. And people were detained on the ground. These are Samaritans for like about 2 hours or something before they would finally let go.
Wow.
And it was somewhat unprecedented. It's this whole thing of these unmarked vehicles, people not in uniform who look like hoodlums, you know, but they were supposedly, you know, and it hasn't happened again. And there was some process where they complained, and, you know, so hopefully it won't happen again, but it's really scary out there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So we got time for another question or two. I think I'll take one. If an immigrant jumps through all the hoops, how long does it take to become naturalized? And once you're naturalized, are you pretty much as safe as any other U.S. born citizen?
It used to be that was the case, right? But now I think we're hearing, oh, if it's legal or if it's possible, can we deport citizens who were not born in the U.S.? And I think that's the current administration's approach, to try to deport as many people as possible. But I mentioned earlier that the most common way to become documented is through a family member. And you have to meet eligibility as an immediate family member. So a U.S. citizen petitioner can petition for their spouse, child under 21, their parent, as immediate relatives. If they want to petition for their sibling, the sibling is going to have to wait for the visa to become available. If they want to petition for their over 21-year-old child, the child has to wait for their visa to become available. Someone from Mexico who's a child of a U.S. citizen, but the child is over 21, has to wait more than 25 years for the visa to become available. That's the very first step. Visa becomes available, then they apply for consular process. They have to wait another year to get a visa, to get the appointment, and then they come. 26 years by that time, the child has made, you know, is grown up, probably has a family, probably got married, and no longer they move to a different category. So it takes a long time. So when you hear people get in line, it's not that easy, right? It's the line is so long for many people. A U visa, a petitioner who's in the U.S., they suffered a crime, they collaborated, they are, you know, in the U.S. Right now, I think it's about 10 years before a U visa, 4 years of temporary status is given. 3 years later, they can apply to become a resident green card holder. 5 years later, a citizen. So 10 plus 8, 18 years later, you can become a citizen. And it's very long.
Oh, I never thought it was that long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard somebody, a Colombian citizen who lives in Colombia, and we were just in Colombia on a vacation trip, and this guy, at the time that the people were being deported in a military plane to Colombia from the United States, and this guy was saying, well, you know, these people, they shouldn't have come illegally to the United States. And he was not feeling sorry for any of them that got deported back to Colombia. And why did they leave in the first place? And he knew somebody, he knew somebody who just thought it would be cool. And so he illegally entered the United States, and people should not illegally enter, and blah, blah, blah. And I tried to explain to him, well, the only way you could legally enter, you might have to wait 30 years. But that's kind of what you're saying is, you know, in fact, you might not be able to ever get a visa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Life happens, the petitioner dies, and then what happens? It gets automatically revoked. And then you have to go through a different hoop or, overcome another hurdle. Find another family member who can be the petitioner, financial sponsor, right? There's so much that happens.
You can't come to the United States. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's no avenue. Is there any avenue that doesn't take years and years?
There could be, yes. So if you're an immediate relative, could be 2-3 years, right?
A student, or to Sherry's point, what student would ever want to come here anymore? May as well go somewhere else where you're not going to be kidnapped.
And their status are being revoked when they have lawful status for the duration of their studies. And violations of first right amendments are happening.
Okay, well, any other short question that we haven't more or less covered? Because we really appreciate Malou's time that she's spent with us.
Thank you.
Any urgent questions? Sherry, the last question.
Mine is a silly one to send us out the door laughing. I think maybe we should deport Melania Trump. She is not a U.S. born citizen.
Well, and Musk.
And Musk.
And Musk, yes.
I would have to.
That's just for fun.
I would have to speak as an immigrant rights advocate and say no.
I was reading that they could just swap that Garcia guy for Musk, you know, just like, it's a mistake.
So many possibilities, Sam.
Thank you.
So I think this is really an educational meeting, so it'll be on our YouTube site forever. So we'll have links from our PNHP Washington website. So if you could send me somehow the PowerPoint or the slideshow, can you do that by?
I will.
Job
I'll do it tonight.
Yeah, because I think I'll need to sit down and when I'm watching the video, pause the slides and try to take in at least 10% of the information that you've given us tonight.
Thank you so much, David.
And before we sign off, I found that a PDF of that deportation effect on the healthcare manpower from the JAMA that Mindy mentioned. And I put that in the chat. So if you want to click on that to download it, it's right there in the chat. It's with the little Adobe symbol.
Yeah, there's a bunch of studies that show that immigrants provide more money to our economy than they take out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, that seems a shock. Why? That's impossible. But they pay taxes at the grocery store and many other ways and cheap labor for farming.
And income tax, right?
Yeah.
They pay federal income tax.
Right. Anyway, thank you very much for your wonderful talk.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for the very thoughtful questions and discussion. And I appreciate your support. And also, I know many of you are doing so much for the community already. So thank you. And this goes beyond immigration law, right, or immigration needs. I think many sectors are being impacted right now. So thank you.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we'll sign off.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
When I do the video, we'll have some music background here and there.
Oh, good. Great.
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, thank you. Bye-bye.